Ben, we're live now. People
Okay.
are going to see the recording and see us awkwardly sitting and waiting for 2 minutes.
I don't know any jokes, to be honest. No good jokes, anyway.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some bad dad jokes as well. Do you know what Baby Yoda said when he saw himself on Blu-ray for the first time?
What did he say?
HDMI.
There you go.
HDMI, yeah. Bad.
Did you say, Fredrik, you can definitely share your screen on this, because mine is not. I haven't updated my permissions on my new MacBook, so sadly I won't be able to.
Yes, let's see.
Oh, there you go.
Awesome. So Ben, your turn. Any jokes in store?
No, I won't even attempt a joke, because it'll be so made up on the spot and terrible.
Those are usually the best ones, aren't they?
If Anna was here from Hallam, she's I don't think she is yet, but she's she's got plenty of jokes.
Excellent. So those of you who have joined, the rest of the webinar won't be as awkward as it is right now. We're just waiting for everybody to join. So while you're here, everybody, if you'd like to write in where you're ringing in from, so we can sort of see where you're from. I'm calling in from Finland, so you can probably hear on the accent that I'm not from the UK.
Yeah, not as exotic here in Nottingham.
At least we have Tom and Lauren here. I can see that we're far more as well, but hi people today. There's the chat in the window here, so you can ask questions all throughout, or you can ask us questions already now, like something in particular that you'd like to. Hi Liam. So something in particular that you'd like to get an answer to today from the webinar. So we'll change the slides on the fly, or the order of them, maybe at least. All right. Let's just wait for, I guess, a minute or something more. So Ben, what's the stuff on your blackboard in the back? I see a blog post and then loads of arrows in different directions.
It's where the UX team always use this room to map out some of the site maps and website structures. So yeah, looks like I'm in not a professor.
Nice. Ooh, we have somebody from Sweden. Välkommen, Mattias från Sverige. All right, hey, let's kick it off. Welcome everybody to this webinar on preparing for life after universal analytics. It's not as a doomsday scenario as maybe the title suggests, hopefully at least. Maybe it is, you'll see soon. Let's have a short introduction so you know who is here. So my name is Fredrik. I'm from Finland. I've been working in marketing technology since 2006, or a little bit before already actually, but professionally since 2006. And I'm currently the CEO at Leadoo Marketing Technologies. We're a technology company that builds technology for marketeers to help them in converting more of their website traffic. And I just made up a word on the last bullet point. I saw that Ben had 3 bullet points, and 3 is a magic number, so I had to make up 3 bullet points. I'm a more techie. I'm quite a technical person by education and by interest, but I've always been working in marketing or like marketing and the go-to-market side. And then I have a pinch of GDPR in my blood nowadays. I know everybody's favorite subject, GDPR. You can see it on my smile on the right-hand side here as well. I'm very happy about GDPR. But there might be some implications from GDPR into what Google has decided to do with GA4 and Universal Analytics as well. So pleasure to have you join and pleasure to have Ben join as well. So Ben, who are you?
Thanks, Fredrik. My name is Ben Wood. I am the Growth and Innovation Director at an agency in the UK called Hallam. I'm responsible across the agency for the design of new services and identification of new technologies that can help our clients grow. I'm a guest lecturer in marketing at Nottingham Trent University, and I've been working in digital for over 14 years. I also contribute monthly columns to sites like Search Engine Journal, Search Engine Land, on paid media and analytics, which is obviously the topic of the webinar today.
Excellent. So I'm in good hands. I have somebody who knows about stuff with me in the webinar at least. So pleasure to have you, Ben, here. Just a short introduction to the agenda. We'll try to keep it to the point and be as quick as possible so you can get to continue with your daily agenda as well. I'm sure nobody wants to be here just for the sake of meeting us, even though we're nice guys. But first, we'll look into what is happening in general and why is this happening. We all know that Universal Analytics is sunsetting this summer. I think it's 1st of July. And then after that, we'll dive into the depths of what is the difference between Universal Analytics, the old stuff, and Google Analytics 4, the new stuff. There's changes in both the way they process data, which has implications on things, and then also the user interface. So we've got some screenshots and try to highlight some of the key differences between these two. So once you transition, if you haven't transitioned already, then you'll at least know what to expect from there. Then on the third bullet point, we have other alternatives. So now that you or your company is looking for different alternatives for Universal Analytics, you might be considering some other alternatives as well. And we listed some of the most common ones that we've come across with our customers, and just a short chat around those as well. There are some non-US based alternatives as well, which is something that pops up in many of both Ben's and myself, our customers, sort of questions always nowadays, thanks to GDPR and sort of privacy changes and so forth. And finally, the $1 million or pound question is it really meaningful to track that sort of website traffic data? Is there something that could be even more meaningful? I won't leave the cliffhanger for too long. Maybe spoil it a little bit that we think that there might be some other things, that it's not the ultimate truth to only sort of measure one thing alone. So there's many different aspects to consider there. But hey, let's get started. Let's start with what's happening and why. So Ben, I'll click through the slides for you and
cool.
Let's get started.
Okay, thanks, Fredrik. So as you can see on this slide, really, the major change and the reason that I'm sure many of you are here today is because standard or universal analytics is being phased out, and in only roughly 4 months' time, it will be stopping collecting data or hits entirely. There are many ways that you need to prepare for this, which we're going to cover today. Obviously, for businesses who currently use Google Analytics and rely on that for collecting things like website traffic data and conversion data, we would encourage you to upgrade to Google Analytics 4 if you haven't already done so. Obviously, if you're on the fence as to whether to continue using Google, we will be explaining, or Fredrik will be explaining, a few alternatives later on. One small caveat that I've added there at the bottom is that anyone using GA360, which is the premium or paid for version of Google Analytics, that's been pushed back to 2024 to move to GA4. So you've got an extra year if you're using the paid for, which is probably only a few of you on the call, if any, that will be using that. So before we go into the detail of the differences, I want to kind of add some additional context around why this change is happening and what's really brought it about. So there are 3 major changes that have been happening in the digital industry, which are important to understand before we dive into the specifics. So the first one that I'm sure you've probably read or watched talks about is the much publicized death of third-party cookies. So previously, Google had intended to stop using third-party cookies, if you remember, by the end of 2022, which would mean they were already not being used on Chrome. Then it was pushed back to the end of 2023. As of today, it's currently been pushed back to the second half of 2024. So they keep pushing back the deadline to stop using third-party cookies, but I think next year will be the year. Now, remember that many browsers such as Safari and Firefox already block third-party cookies by default. Google have delayed this much longer than most to implement the change because of the implications it will have on ad targeting, tracking in things like Universal Analytics. Another major change.
Before you go there, a small sort of caveat. So even though Chrome is the major browser on desktop nowadays, most of the mobile traffic come on iPhones, and because of that, it's Safari based. So basically, like all of the visitors that come to your website already today with an iPhone, they are not being tracked over sessions anymore because Safari throws away those third-party cookies. So that's where sort of the change is already here. Now we're only talking about the last steps, which is basically desktop, because that's the majority of what Chrome is used for.
Okay. Another major change again that's happened related to the Apple, the company, iOS 14. So a couple of updates ago made tracking in apps an opt-in situation. So you can actively pop, you'll see if you use an Apple iPhone device that it's like, ask this app to track, do you want the app to track your data? And it's much easier to opt out of that and block app tracking than it is to opt in. So now there's a huge proportion of iOS users choosing to opt out of tracking. This is actually up, I think in 2022, the number of people who blocked tracking on apps is up 216% since 2016, which will be heavily impacting, as Fredrik said, your marketing and advertising data. So you'll just maybe seeing stories, if you follow certain blogs, of Facebook and Twitter, partly because of Elon Musk, but partly because of this, losing massive amounts of advertising revenue. It's largely because the advertisers can't track the data that those networks are actually sending. So it's not that they don't work. They probably are driving sales and conversions, but you can't track them and measure them as easy as you used to. And finally, I think, Fredrik, you've probably got something to add on here. There's various pieces of legislation that have triggered many of these changes, such as GDPR, e-privacy directive, and other forms of global legislation. From my perspective, I think, cookie policies, for example, have come about because of this, which have been a huge issue. But
yeah, so basically, sort of, this is not only a trend in the EU, even though EU and Europe try to be at the forefront of it. But for instance, many states in the United States have decided to follow suit. And for instance, the CCPA in California is pretty much on par with GDPR, requiring that you give consent before being tracked. So this is sort of a global phenomenon of privacy that was driven by both legislation on the right as well as specific vendors in the middle, specific vendors that don't make their money out of advertising. So Apple, of course, has more to win on it than Google because Apple's revenue doesn't come from advertising. Although there are rumors that it might in the future, but sort of Google's revenue is almost 99% or probably even more driven by advertising. So there are many trends that are driving in the direction that it's harder and harder to track users. And when we talk about tracking, we're talking about session over session tracking, basically meaning that we want to be able to tie you visiting the website a week ago to you visiting the website today and seeing that you are the same person without like this capability through cookies. You will show up as two different people, which will make our way of sort of tailoring or personalizing your advertising or website experience a lot harder. So this is actually quite a fundamental change that's been happening. And
yeah, I think it's partly, again, when we go on to talk about why Google are moving towards GA4 is because of the combination of these factors. I think Apple is a great example. If you've seen the ads that actually run on TV or online, they are really focusing on positioning the company around user privacy and the fact that Apple will put your privacy first. That's their whole marketing now is revolved around privacy. So they understand that this is a growing concern for users across the globe, and they're really positioning themselves on top of that trend. So yeah, three factors that are really driving this shift that are important to note. I've taken a screen grab here because obviously the topic of today is mainly focused on GA4.
Always the positive, Ben.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll bring it around with a few positives on GA4. I think there's a few screen grabs here that are pretty representative of the feedback that I'd often see online around GA4 so far. Guess the guy on the bottom right, Ryan Jones, that's probably along the lines of what you're going to end up taking away from this talk today. Really, there is a massively steep learning curve from GA4 to Universal Analytics. As I'll go on to explain, there's some huge differences, and there are things to learn. But just because it's a big change and you're going to lose some of the features you used to in Universal Analytics doesn't mean you can bury your head in the sand. There's many other things we need to be considering based on those 3 trends we saw earlier on. You can't do nothing because the trend is overwhelmingly in the direction of a privacy-first web. So yeah, if you plan to just continue using Universal Analytics until the end of June and not do anything, then you're going to be struggling for the rest of the year, I would say.
Yeah, and just reflecting backwards, so I think I created my first website in '99 or something like that, and obviously Google Analytics wasn't around during that time. I just checked on Wikipedia, so Google Analytics was released in 2005, and obviously it's not the same product as Universal Analytics is today even, but basically we as marketeers have gotten very used to Universal Analytics, the user interface, the sort of what's possible to do with it, and we've been able to work around the things that aren't possible to do with. So it's also a very huge mental shift to have to switch into something new, to sort of have to think in different terms, because we've all throughout the years, through like almost 15 years, gotten used to, or more than 15 years, gotten used to what Google Analytics or Universal Analytics looks like.
Exactly. And I think it's how, to be honest, most of the investment in digital marketing has come about, because the fact that you can measure really clearly every channel, what it drives in terms of conversions and revenue, is why so many marketing teams have poured more and more budget into digital over traditional offline marketing, because it's much more difficult to measure. But we're going to have a very similar issue that probably the offline teams have faced in recent years, with things being more difficult to measure. So yeah, we're going to talk about how we can prepare you all for the coming months. Number of ways in which you can prepare your business for the changes in privacy and the loss of third-party cookies, many of which we don't have time for today. So obviously, you might have heard things like building more first-party data rather than relying on third-party cookies for your ad targeting. But one thing we are going to focus today is preparing you for an era of privacy-first measurement and ensure you're fully up to speed with the major differences between GA4 and Universal Analytics, which I'm going to now talk you through. So Google, as we talked about, the 3 things that are going to be impacting the industry, or are already impacting the industry. Google have positioned GA4 as a privacy-first measurement platform that will work with or without cookies or identifiers. So Google are going to leverage machine learning and statistical modeling to fill in the gaps in the data as we become less and less dependent on cookies. Now, the term modeling is really, really important to note here. What it means essentially is filling in the gaps of the data that's been lost through people declining tracking, by apps blocking tracking, from people not clicking no to cookie policies. And it's this concept of modeling, rather than having that 100% data accuracy, that we're going to have to become more comfortable with in the future. So attribution in analytics and other platforms has always been imperfect, but it's going to become even more difficult to get an absolutely accurate picture in the future, which is why I think modeling is going to become more familiar to all of us on the call.
Yeah, I think, Ben, what you mentioned earlier, like we are moving towards the same world now where the non-digital world has always been in terms of like measurement. Maybe previously you walked down to the street and asked people to fill in a survey, or asked 100 people a question, and then you extrapolated from there and said that, okay, 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people think like this. It's pretty much the same thing in digital, and it's not only Google's products, it's all products that are doing the same thing. It's pretty much sort of happening all over the place, that we're sort of filling in those gaps by different statistical measures. There's machine learning or linear regression or any kinds of sort of mathematical modeling, econometrics, in order to get to those. So that's the key takeaway, I would say.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of stuff, if any of you read websites like Marketing Week or The Drum, which are kind of like broader marketing publications, probably less technical than what a lot of us would typically go to. there's a lot of people banging the drum now around econometrics and the struggles with digital attribution because of these things we've already mentioned. So I think if you, like Fredrik's going to come on to talk about, alternative measurement principles outside of analytics are also worth bearing in mind. But before we get on to that, I think I'm going to now talk to you about the main differences you need to be aware of. So there's a number of ways in which GA4 differs from what we're all used to with Universal Analytics. The key differences on this slide, I'm going to kind of expand on in a moment, but mainly, I think there's the 5 you can see there. So privacy first tracking is the first one. So GA4 will work using first-party cookies, just like Universal Analytics, but it's designed to work in a world without cookies altogether. So this focus on modeling, for example, will help them fill in the blanks where cookies aren't able to be used for tracking. Modeling, again, as I just touched on, it's a necessary requirement for privacy first measurement. So GA4 will be modeling for gaps in the traffic conversions using machine learning, which currently Universal Analytics can't do. Cross-platform tracking, so websites and apps can now be combined into a single report in GA4 if you wanted to do that. I will also talk to you about how you can filter out performance using filters or data streams in GA4. Obviously, it's great to be able to combine performance, but actually, if I had a client that had a website and an app, they'd probably also want to see the stats split up as well. And then additional attribution models. So data-driven attribution is now available in GA4, which was previously a feature in Google Ads. And the final one, unified measurement of user events. So it's a move away from this kind of separate session-based identifiers in Universal Analytics. Basically, everything is moving towards being an event in GA4, as you'll get to understand in a moment. If you'd have anything to add to those major points there, Fredrik?
No, I think this is a really good slide summarizing everything. There's the next slide. I can't remember if it's the next or the next following that, but the one where we look at what kind of event types there are in Google Analytics 4. But basically, this picture very much summarizes the differences between, on the top, the new Google Analytics 4, and on the bottom, the old one, the Universal Analytics that we're all used to using from before.
Cool. So as I touched on, I think one of the biggest changes is the data model that's used in GA4. So in Universal Analytics, the measurement model was based on sessions and page views. And by contrast, GA4, every interaction that you're able to measure is captured as an event. So in GA4, even a page view is an event. Essentially, everything you can track is an event. And these events can be customized to provide much more detailed information in GA4. So events obviously existed in Universal Analytics as well. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with setting up kind of category, action, and label events in Universal Analytics. GA4 works with event parameters that are additional pieces of information about the action or event. Some of these are sent automatically. They're already set up and configured for you in GA4. And some of them will need additional customization. So you can add up to 25 event parameters beneath each event. And I think what I'm finding with this and what a lot of our clients are finding is actually getting the hang of Tag Manager and customizing events in GA4 is arguably even more important than it was in Universal Analytics. I don't know if you'd add anything on the data model, Fredrik, on this and how it works.
No, I mean, I think the cool thing here is that there are so many presets, like percentage scrolled, for instance, and the fact that you can use that, or Google uses that as a proxy for bounce rate. So because previously we measured sessions and now we're measuring events, there's sort of, I think, a more dynamic way of measuring bounce rate or engagement on the site, for instance. So there's probably some technical reasons in the background why Google has made this, but it has enabled some interesting things for us as users as well. Don't be afraid of this slide. It's probably the most technical slide we have in the set of slides. So maybe we should jump here so people don't fall off.
Exactly. One other thing that I think is one of the major things that's changing, as you will notice if you've used GA4 already, or if you're planning to get started on it, historically in Google Analytics and Universal Analytics, you'd have different views available. So if you click on the top bar in Universal Analytics, you'll be able to kind of click on a different view of your website. So typical ones you'd see set up are reports for like unfiltered data, like the raw data you collect on the website. A lot of people would add a view to filter out like their office IP address. So it filters out internal traffic, for example. There might be a separate view for different countries or different areas of the world. In GA4, you don't have the option to create different views. Instead, you've got one view. You have instead to use a feature called data streams for your website and your apps. So data streams, which you can see on that kind of filter on the right-hand side that I've popped out on the screenshot, they work in much the same way as views, and they can be applied to basically any report in GA4. An example of a data stream would be, and there's things that are pre-built out of the box when you go to set them up, like an app, for example, you can start tracking that as a data stream. So you can separate, if you wanted to, app and website data streams, or you can just view one or the other. If you want to customize them and play around with the data streams, you visit the admin panel, click on data streams, which is under the property option. So yeah, one major difference to be aware of, you don't have different views. You've got one view, but you can filter things out using the data stream feature.
Yeah, and a word of warning to those of you who haven't used GA4 yet. The first time you log into GA4, your first impression will probably be, bummer, where are all my pre-made filters and where is everything like it used to be on the left-hand side? Now there's nothing, but at the same time, you can do even more with it. So it's almost like moving from a self-driving car into a spaceship rocket console. So there's more power, but it's also harder to use the first time. Once you get used to it, you can make these pre-made filters, and it's equally as easy as the old one, at least almost.
That's the quote from the webinar there, Fredrik.
Car
into the spaceship. It's a good analogy. So I think the next one is bounce rate and this concept of engaged sessions. So I think initially when I looked at it, bounce rate wasn't even included. They've now added it back in as the kind of opposite to engaged sessions. So the way that bounce rate is reported in GA4 has changed for the better, in my opinion. So Google have introduced this concept called engaged sessions. So obviously when you're in the platform and you hover over it, just like standard Universal Analytics, because all these things are new, hover over those columns and basically you'll figure out what they mean. But an engaged session is what Google term as lasting longer than 10 seconds, or it has a conversion event as part of the session, or people view at least 2 page views or screen views. So the engagement rate is the percentage of sessions that were, as Google classed, engaged sessions, and bounce rate is the percentage of sessions that weren't engaged sessions. So bounce rate is the inverse of engagement rate, basically. So yeah, for example, if someone visits your website, reviews the content on homepage for less than 10 seconds and then leaves without doing any other events or visiting any other pages, then analytics will still count that as a bounce, and the bounce rate percentage will increase.
Or an unengagement, which is a bounce.
Exactly. Yeah. I hate bounce rate as a term, and people obsess over it way too much. So some of our clients, for example, will put bounce rate as like a key metric for the website, which is like, I understand really, but it's, yeah, there's other things.
Change is hard for us people, Ben. We don't want anything new. We want something that we understand, that we known from before.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, I think probably the biggest change, Fredrik, that a lot of people will mention is the less standard or out of the box reports that are available in GA4. This was one of the things that really struck me when I first logged in a few months ago. And one of the reasons why it's probably getting a lot of hate so far, because it's such a huge change to the reports we're used to getting in Universal Analytics. So GA4 has less out-of-the-box reports. It's designed, as Fredrik said, to efficiently collect data and be really customizable as you need it. So the key here, I'd say, is getting familiar with setting up detailed events, using Tag Manager to track more valuable event data, which will then allow you to go and build out more effective reports. So it will take more getting used to and more customization than Universal Analytics, but the power in the tool is actually probably greater than Universal Analytics, I would say.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of the summary of the major changes, and there's a lot more detail we could go in if we had longer than the hour webinar. The data model is significantly different to Universal Analytics, based entirely on events. Reporting is streamlined, less out-of-the-box functionality, views have been removed and replaced with data streams. So you can view, if you want to, website and app data in a single place. Metrics have completely changed. In this concept of engagement rate and engaged sessions has now come about. And the way that events and conversions is easier than in Universal Analytics to set up, but it still takes some quite significant customization. I think the real key point to bear in mind with Universal Analytics, GA4 and other privacy first measurement solutions is the direction of travel in our industry is towards modeling. Because of those issues we're having with, the loss of third-party cookies and increased privacy constraints, modeling is going to become more commonplace in these platforms to fill in the gaps that we're going to lose from people blocking cookies or blocking tracking entirely.
Exactly. So just to dumb it down a little bit, just to stress the fact of modeling. So what it means is that if 20% of your visitors allow tracking, then we will try to model what the remaining 80% is doing based on different machine learning models or in the easiest case, like just linearly extrapolating that 20% clicked on the pricing page. So let's assume that the remaining 80% also did that. It's not as simple as that, but just to dumb it down a little bit. All right, let's move forward. So far we've covered 2 of the 4 agenda points, and we're more than halfway through the webinar. So let's have a look at a few alternative platforms, because when you are now considering moving away from Universal Analytics, at least with our experience from our customers, many are also looking at different alternatives. Would there be a mean to move away from something else than Google's products? And basically driven by the privacy aspect, that if we move away from something into something new, the learning curve is still going to be there. So should we move into something that is even more privacy sort of centric? And Matomo and Piwik Pro here on the left at the top are probably the ones we bounce the most into. Most of them have their sort of founding story in an open source project called Piwik, which was then forked into 2 different directions. So Piwik Pro, which is today a commercial version, I think they have a free version as well, and Matomo, which is an open source version, sort of basic. I think they renamed Piwik into Matomo just to not confuse it with the Piwik Pro version. But both of them you can even install yourself. Well, we'll get to the pros and cons, but obviously understand that if you need to install something yourself, it's a totally different ball game in terms of how much work it's going to require. Then we have Adobe Analytics, more enterprisey maybe, but sort of doing the same kind of ish things that Google's analytics tooling is doing, but obviously delivered by Adobe. Then we have Mixpanel. Mixpanel is maybe a little bit a different kind of a beast, built mostly for following user engagements, or I think they have like taxi companies using them to see how long the trips are and stuff like that, but also covering website analytics. And then we have Oribi, mostly concentrating on conversion. And then we have Leadoo, the company I'm representing, also concentrating on conversion optimization and conversion analytics and insights. Without diving into, we don't have a quick sheet for you for which one to pick, but we put together a list of factors to consider when you're looking at these different things. We divided them into pros and cons, but they're more like factors. Most cases, these would probably consider pros. So compared to Google's product, you would be owning the data in most of these cases, especially if you have it installed on your own servers and so forth. So that's a large thing. You can have them EU-based, and some of these companies are EU-based, and some of these tools can be installed in EU, or you can install them in your own server farm as well, when they'll be EU-based or Europe-based. So with that, we're tackling the GDPR risk of personal information being transferred to an American company, regardless if the servers will be located in Luxembourg or Ireland. The company is still American, which might have implications on it. These might offer different kinds of hosting alternatives. So you might be able to host it in cloud, in the company's cloud, in your own cloud, on premises. Also something that Universal Analytics because you're using a free service when you've been using Universal Analytics and in the future GA4, they might change the terms. So they might change the retention period of the data. So if it's very important that you're able to go back to data 5 years ago or 10 years ago, then owning the data is central in that part. And also, these other companies are not sort of incentivized by ad revenue. So as you know, Google's main source of revenue is advertising. So they obviously are using this data to create their own machine learning models and to target their own users and your users even better. So this is sort of course, a pros and cons side of thing, but sort of with this, if you were hosting the data yourself, there wouldn't be incentives for anybody else to use it for anything else. I haven't read through the small print in GA4, so I can't attest to what Google can or can't do with the data. And then sort of a technical thing, when website visitors come to your website, if they are blocking Google Tag Manager, Google Ads through their sort of ISP, your internet service provider, and or their browser or DNS server or whatever, Google is most often on the blacklist of things to block out, especially Google Tag Manager, which means that your Google Analytics or Universal Analytics or in the future GA4 won't even launch, as opposed to if you have your own hosted or some less known sort of or less advertising prone solution, then sort of most likely it will not be blocked and you will get the analytics. Some cons, of course, there is limited integration to, for instance, Google Tag Manager. I think Piwik Pro, for instance, have their own tag manager, which pretty much works in the same way as Google Tag Manager. Some of these solutions have very well integrated solutions into Google Tag Manager. So if you're relying upon Google Tag Manager, this might be a con if you're using some of the other alternatives. There might be different definitions of different metrics. So as Ben talked about, bounce rate or engagement rate, it might be defined differently. So when transitioning from one platform to another, you might not be able to sort of use the same data points and say that, hey, now our bounce rate is 20% less. That said, you won't be able to use that when transitioning from Universal Analytics to GA4 either. So there are different ways of measuring. And then, of course, if you were to go down the path of installing it yourself, you're going to need IT resources as opposed to just clicking something on. But many of the providers, or actually probably all of the providers on the previous slide, do offer the hosting capability as well, so you don't have to set it up yourself. Anything, Ben, from your side to add to the pros and cons list? Or?
No, I think just one comment would be there have been a few clients contact us in the past who have concerns over using Google Analytics, and there have been a few, if you read about it, a few articles of people worrying about GA4 still not being GDPR compliant. Certainly in a few countries across Europe, it's classed as not compliant still. So, you know, these alternative platforms that Fredrik mentioned are definitely worth considering if your organization has concerns over privacy and GDPR still. I'd say 99% of our clients still happy to use GA4, even ones that have got, you know, based in Europe or North America. The one thing that pops up, the one platform that pops up more than any other one is Matomo. It's, you know, used by, I think, organizations like NASA, the United Nations, and the European Commission. So I think it's obviously the one that's seen as the privacy first measurement platform. I can't say that I've used it personally, but it's the one that comes up as the kind of gold standard in terms of privacy.
Yeah. I bounced into Matomo and Piwik Pro, both of them, and obviously Adobe Analytics as well, and of course our own platform. But yeah, very good points. All right, I think Paul had a question to maybe talk a little bit more about Tag Manager quickly, or like maybe touching upon Google Tag Manager quickly. For those of you unfamiliar with what Tag Manager does, basically it is a way to insert scripts into your own site, and it has a data layer where you can push data, and then you can push that data forward into different platforms, simplifying the thing a little bit. But the challenge really with Google Tag Manager is that it's probably the most blocked service on any ad blocker nowadays. So I have a very simple ad blocker on my computer, and it blocks everything that Google Tag Manager tries to push at my browser. And the same is true for like mobile network providers. They try to push all of these away just because their network would otherwise be a lot slower. So that's sort of something to consider if you're relying heavily on Google Tag Manager. Now might be the sort of time to think about alternatives as well, because it's used for so many things that it's ad blocked in quite many places, sadly. It's a really awesome tool. I've used it a lot and I love it a lot, but the fact just is that it's blocked in many places. All right, so alternative metrics then. You probably can all sort of see similarities with your own thought world. So if you look at the list on the right-hand side and the percentages, this was a survey on sort of what marketeers are struggling with to measure. So cross-platform measurement, ad placement with publishers with first-party data acquisition, creator influence, marketing mix modeling, and so forth. These are all getting over 50% numbers. And marketing mix basically, and combined with this econometrics, and basically meaning linear regression and everything that Ben talked about with what GA4 is doing. How are we able to measure efficiently with first-party data or then combinations of different sources, what results we're getting from the marketing that we're doing? And this is sort of a huge struggle, which Google is trying to solve by this machine learning algorithms. But I think we all in the industry are struggling with the same thing. We have less data nowadays. How do we make the best out of it? And what's happening in the industry. So on the right-hand side, you can read the tweet. Both Facebook and Google tell me that they're pivoting away from attribution modeling towards econometrics for evaluating effectiveness. So this is the same thing that we talked about previously as well. So seeing actually what is driving the revenue or conversion instead of sort of just seeing traffic as it is, and sort of trying to see the traffic as an entirety instead of just the subset of people that give us consent to track them. So these are sort of really big trends. And this given, and at the same time, you all know how the buyer's journey has become more complicated. We have more people involved in the buying process, even in smaller companies, and there are more touch points. Some of them are on the web, some of them are in the physical world, some of them happen on TV and radio and so forth. But sort of the buyer's journey is still the same. We're still trying to identify problems, looking at solutions, looking at requirements that we need to be fulfilled, and then we're looking at a short or long list of suppliers. But there's a lot of things happening here, and being able to measure all of this is really the challenge. So we have to be able to pick the most meaningful things to measure, and especially be able to backtrack from the end to the beginning, that what was actually driving the conversion at the rate, or the sale or the business at the end of the day. And that's our job as marketeers. The thing that makes it even harder is that we have very few people who actually come to our website and then leave their contact information with us. This might be actually an optimistic figure. This is more from the B2B world. On the B2C side, I've seen numbers like 99.8%, so 0.2% only actually convert when going to a B2C site. It, of course, varies across industries and websites and so forth. But out of 100 people, 2 people leaving their contact information is quite high, I would say. But what about those 98% then? When we are looking at website traffic in general, we are concentrating on the 98% or the 100%. At the same time, only that 2% is meaningful in terms of driving our revenue, driving our sales team's revenues, our company's revenues. So we as marketeers should be concentrating more on what is that 2%? How can we make that 2%, 4%, or 8% instead? Even though it's harder to track, your prospects and also your sort of new prospects, both the people that are in your CRM pipeline as well as those that are coming to the website for the first time, they're leaving buying signals around the website. So you can see here depicted by the line here, people clicking on different things and looking at different things. They're leaving these signals behind them. You're probably all familiar with tools like Hotjar that are able to look at this on an individual basis. But looking at a website with 10,000 or 100,000 visitors, it doesn't make sense to look at individuals anymore. We want to see that out of those 10,000 people, the 20 people that actually converted into a sale, what did they do? What was special about them? This is where conversion rate analysis and insights come into the picture. So just reading through the bullet points quickly here. So we want to see what marketing and sales actions actually bring results, what bring like the top line revenue to the company. That said, we want to see which channels work the best, which measures work the best. We want to see that the buyer's journey from first touch point on your website all the way to the conversion point, what does it require? How many days does it take? How many touch points? How many visits does it take? Also, we want to be able to see how well are we doing compared to the industry average, for instance. And then we also have to remember that we don't want any kind of traffic to the website. We want to attract the right kind of traffic to our website. We want to attract our ICP that we know will pay the highest annual contract fee or value to us, which has the lowest sort of customer acquisition cost. So this sort of boils down to the quality metrics. On the left-hand side, you can see a screenshot of Leadoo's dashboard, basically showing sort of data on these kind of analytics in an easily readable way. I'll give you an example again. Obviously, I'm using Leadoo as a platform here, but this can most probably be done in different platforms as well. But the most important thing is that we want to distinguish between different conversion types. On the left-hand side here, I've highlighted a source insights view. You can see here a date span. Then I've added here in the first red box, I've added a filter saying that, hey, I'm interested in everybody who has converted through a guide download, comparison material download, case study material download. I want to basically see that, hey, those people at the top of the funnel who are not yet interested in buying, but they're interested in what we have to provide or how to do conversion rate optimization and so forth. Where did they come in from? And on the sort of the second red box that I've highlighted on the bottom, I can see that, okay, their first touch came through LinkedIn. If I look at the different columns here, I know there's different attribution models in a very simple matter. We're here divided into first touch, mid touch, and last touch. Last touch basically meaning that the visit that actually resulted in them leaving their contact information. But regardless, we can see that LinkedIn is working pretty well here. In the second example, I've used the same date span, but I've used the second sort of conversion type, which is demo request. So these people are probably much further along in the funnel because they've already raised their hand and said that, hey, I want to see the product. I want to get a product demo. And you can see that LinkedIn is nowhere to be seen on this list, or actually in fifth place here. So if we were to go after demo requests or people who are interested in like more top of the funnel content, the channels would be probably quite different. And this is sort of fundamental. We have to know which channels drive which traffic. The next step, however, after that is to understand which companies then come through those channels. So then we can add the same filters again and dive deeper into it. So now, bear with me, we're in the B2B world. I'll come to the B2C world soon. But in the B2B world, we want to see that which companies have actually come through, regardless if they're converted or not. I want to see that companies in the utilities industry who have visited the pricing page, what do we know about them? Now I can't scroll on the screenshot, but I'll see a list of all the companies. I can see that we've identified 6 companies, 3 of them have revisited, and we've gotten 5 leads. So out of these 6 companies, we've gotten 5 people who have left their contact information. Obviously, within one company, there can be several people, so that's why it looks like this. So step number 1, understanding the conversion part, is understanding where do we drive the conversion from, what kind of a conversion is it, and then understanding the B2B part, what kind of companies is it. And then finally, on the left-hand side, diving into the individuals. On the left-hand side, you can see a screenshot again. So what did the individuals do? If we want to nail the ideal customer profile, we probably want to have a look at these people in more detail and see what did they look at. But we don't want to do, like as in Hotjar, as I mentioned previously, don't want to look at every individual. We want to look at the interesting individuals who actually converted and are our ICP. So why conversion analytics? It's not to throw away the website analytics. We still need the website analytics, but in most cases, it's probably more meaningful. We want to find out what channels work for our ICP, what our ICP looks like and who they are, and then sort of look at the individuals within the ICP. Then we can go and optimize the conversion and drive more traffic and add more spending in LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever we see that we're driving the most conversion from. Conclusion. Ben, do you want to speak for a while? I'm dry in my mouth already.
Yeah, I've lost the slides, so I can't see what the points are. But I think off the top of my head, I think the first one was around moving towards this kind of era of modeling, away from this 100% accurate attribution of website performance. We're having to do that because of increased privacy constraints, increased legislation, such as GDPR. There's a lot more that this means to your marketing activities aside from which analytics platform you use. So things that we're happy to share posts and resources after this session to any of the attendees for sure. Reporting in GA4, which is probably what many of you are interested in, is streamlined, less out of the box features. So when you do set that up, which I'd encourage you to do if you haven't already done so, you will have a bit of a learning curve to go through. And then obviously, as Fredrik's mentioned, when you're considering an alternative for universal analytics, think about the bigger picture, think about why you actually need analytics in the first place. What are you doing with that data to actually inform decision-making across the business? So is analytics that you're already using giving you everything you need, or do you need to consider an alternative platform or an additional platform, such as the ones that Fredrik's mentioned? Don't know if you want to add anything to that, Fred?
No, I think that's a very good summary of everything. I'll end with sharing another screen here. So if any of you are interested in reaching out to us, you can find me on linkedin.com/in/FREDU, Fredu, and Ben you can find on linkedin.com/in/woodben. So if you have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to us over LinkedIn, and we're happy to continue the discussion and hopefully help you on your journey as well from universal analytics on towards wherever you're on the journey towards. All right. Thank you very much for joining the webinar. It was a full hour. We were aiming for half an hour and we didn't succeed, but it doesn't matter. Good talk. We have almost everybody left after we started. So thank you very much. Talk to you later.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.